Loving Father, Lord heaven, as we come together this morning, thank you for Brother Daniel for having come and share with him me this morning. We give all praise, glory, and honor, Lord God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Brother Christopher give me a paper with points on it, you see, and he says, when I joined SSF, and why did I join SSF? Well, a little bit sad story here, because Mami Brahmihimi died time me 13, and so I was very sad, and one of the big something else, family Mami Brahmi or with a Methodist, family Daddy from Church of England, Anglican, yeah, and so I used to go between two because the school was the Church of England school. When Mummy died, I was sent to live with one of my aunts who lived close to the Anglican church. I got confirmed, and so that's how I got into the community. And then, interesting thing happened, because the priest there, or one of the former priests there, we started that one first, was the Bishop of Australia. And he was before that, he was Bishop of Papua New Guinea. And he was a priest there, and so everyone knew him. And so right from the beginning, we used to send collection boxes, money to Papua New Guinea, Solomons, because there was the link with this area. So right from being about 13 or 14, I knew about this. And we hear stories about it. But the great thing that happened to me was that we had a visit from the Franciscans. And Brother Brian came. And Brian, he came and he storied, you see. And he's a very, very good man. And because of Brian and the Franciscans, I got to know the Franciscan sisters. And they lived at Low Fell. And they used to run what they call weekends when young people, so from about 15, 16, I used to go to these meetings and meet things. And Father Sillen, a very well-known brother, if you look through, he's a Welshman. And he was the one who helped. And the atmosphere was wonderful, peaceful, supportive. They encouraged you to pray and to think. And you were part of everything that was happening. You see, so I think if I'm looking for influences in my life, I think Sister Ursula, who was the head of the sisters there, a very powerful and lovely woman, and then Father Sillen. They run youth camps there. And so every year we used to go up to the Northumberland, to a very beautiful place, and when you got on the top of the hill, you look across and there's this beautiful island, just like this one. But this was Lindisfarne. The holy island where St. Cuthbert lived. And St. Cuthbert lived there, about 2,000 years ago almost. And it was where the early Christianity came from. So I've always got that memory, you see. And then another thing that struck me from this place, you see, was Now you might get all upset about this, but sorry. We used to have on Ascension, what do you call it, Transfiguration, there was a hill above the campsite, and we used to have Mass on the top. So we'd carry the altar up there, and usually I was the server, and Father Sillen was celebrating. And one day, up there, the wind blew. And one of the wafers blew and went flying out to the sea, you see. And we all got upset because we were all very high church, you see. And we thought, oh, this is terrible. And everybody ready to run down the hill to try and get it. And Sillen put his hand up and said, if Jesus can get into that little piece of bread, he can get out. and so everybody just laughed and accepted that. That was true, you see. All right, we valued the wafer. It was the body and blood of Christ. But because it's blown away out to sea, doesn't mean there's something terrible has happened. It was the wind that blew it, and I didn't make the wind. Sillen didn't make the wind. It was God who sent the wind. And so I got to know these brothers and sisters, these Franciscans, and there was something special in their life. And especially, you see, seeing my mother died when I was 13, and I needed some support. And I think I got it from the church, from Franciscans, and things just went on like that. When I became 21, the rule in England at that time was you either go in the army. And I didn't want to go in the army, because at that time too they were fighting in various places, and sometimes we didn't agree with the fighting and things like that. But if you didn't go in the army, you had to do something like going to sea. I had trained as an engineer, so I thought, right, I'll go to sea as an engineer. So for 6 years, I went to sea as an engineer. So I was chief engineer on ships sailing around the world. And again, it was a very interesting thing, because we were anchored in Singapore when President Kennedy died. And we were the first ship to get the news and put the flag at half-mast. So I found it all a very interesting time. But always behind me, I was a companion of the Franciscans. I must mention this man's name is Father Edward, who used to write letters to me. And so he kept in touch, you know. And so if you meet someone who you think's got a vocation, you keep in touch. You don't just say, oh, I'll say a prayer in chapel, yeah, but you keep in touch with. And so this one was very supportive of me. All right. When I was 26, I could leave the sea. So after I'd been chief engineer in the ship, and then I left and went to Almouth, where Brother Edward was there, and Brother Michael, and the other brothers, and I started as a postulant for 3 months, and then became a novice. I became a novice in St. Abbas with Hillfield Friary, and that was another start, another change, you see, because Hillfield Friary was a very active place in those days. It's not so active, well, it's active now, but in a different way. And there was many brothers there who were always going out on mission. There, at the time we were 33 novices, I think. And so there's a lot of support and lots of lessons, training. But the important thing that I found was the fellowship, that we were looked after and cared for. And you know, all the jobs that we did were with joy and pleasure. I can remember one time we had to clear land for the Forestry Commission, and there was a group of us cutting down trees, and a great big great big tree, very wide, and I was cutting it down, you see, and I cut it like this, and cut it this way, took a wedge out, and I was starting to cut the other side. Then I realized everybody was quiet. And they were all looking, and what's happened? What's wrong? Then when I looked, I saw it was as if a tap had turned on, and water was coming out from the tree. What had happened is the tree takes water up, part of the air, then turns it back to the earth, the other part of the air. And this time was the time when it was turning it back, you see. And all of this comes out, and just as if the tree was crying that we were cutting it down. And so I thought, hey, creation is something special. We cut it down because we had to anyway, because it's this big cut in it. But you realize then that God is in all of creation. That tree was cut down, taken down to the friary and cut into logs. Then we sawed the logs around the villages, and that helped to keep the friary running. But you get an idea that people are not just by themselves. That the whole of creation is the trees and everything, the sea and the water, and it all has value and is all part of where we come from and where we're going. And so I found that very good. But I also found, in a strange way, that God was walking with me. I tell you why. I was still a novice, and we were doing Easter Lenten studies. And so various brothers were sent out. I was still a novice, and I was sent to a place in the north of there, and it was Bristol, a place where lots of shipping, lots of people there, and I was preaching, and everything was going fine. There was good, very big congregation, everything was going fine. And then one day I'm looking at what I have to say for the next couple of days. It was Good Friday, actually, the one I was looking at. And I thought, hey, what am I going to do with this? I don't like what I've written down. It's not really answering the question. And I said, oh, I'll go for a walk. And so I'm walking around Bristol, and then coming in the other direction was a priest. I never met him before. And he came up to me and said, oh, brother, you look a bit worried. And I said, oh, yes. I said, I'm preaching at such and such a church now. And he was one of the famous priests in that area who was on the television giving lectures and things like that. He said, oh, come on, we'll have a cup of tea. He took me into his house, and we had a cup of tea, and we talked about my sermon. And everything just fell into place. And I thought, oh, I think God had wanted me to meet this man. And I felt all the time that in my life, okay, you make mistakes, you do things wrong, but the important thing is that the presence of God is there with you. Sometimes you can't always see him, he's hiding behind or something like that, but if you trust in God, then you will be guided and you will find the right things to do. So this is how I started life in the community. One of the funny things, I was never, I was always a little bit naughty. Always could try to make fun and laugh at things. And we had some people come to stay at the friary, and they were from a different church, different denomination. And the brothers there were quite high brothers, you see. So the guardian, Father Oswald, came in and said, oh, I think tomorrow we will invite these visitors to communion. Oh, everybody was cross because they were very high church. No, you can't do that. They're not really Anglicans. They can't have that. And Oswald was saying like this, and he got really cross, and he walked out and slammed the door saying, "Well, that's the way it's going to be as long as I'm the guardian." And he stormed off. And I had to take some letters to him. So I went to the door and I thought, oh, what do I do here? So I knocked on the door and he said, "Come in." And then nothing happened because I didn't open the door. He came in, he opened the door, and there I was kneeling on my knee, hanging up these papers, and he looked at me and he said, and he laughed and laughed and laughed. I said, "Oh, will the Father Abbot..." So it's got him out of his bad temper as well, you see. And so I think part of the thing of being a Franciscan is that you don't get too serious. You know, then you try, you keep things open, so yeah. And so I handed this up and he took to it and he hit me with a paper and "Come in." And then everything was fine, and it got over it. And I think in my life, I think that's always been one of the things, because I have one brother, much younger, and two sisters, but all my life I've had a big family. So when I was growing up, across the road was my great-grandfather, then the next door house was my grandmother with some children in, with another aunt with 4 girls. So we all lived, it was like a community from the beginning. And so I think the most important thing about I see in my life is always I've been in a community. So a community at my home, a community on the ship, a community when I went to the Friary, and a community here. And I think this is one of the most important things about the Franciscan life, is that we have ups and downs, but this is a place where we share our problems, where we're open with each other, where we walk together, where we find hope. Now then, in Christopher's thing, he said, "Why did you become a Franciscan?" And I think the only reason I can say is, from the beginning, from about being 16, even though I was training as an engineer, even though I went to sea, I knew that I was called to be a Franciscan. It was something, because I saw, the only place where I really saw myself was when I was with the Franciscan brothers, the Franciscan sisters, because I think the sisters had as much influence on me, because we had no brothers living on Tyneside, but we had sisters, and we used to go there for retreats and things, and there was tremendous support. I think that's about the end of what we wanted to do first. So does anyone want to ask anything? No fright.
Maybe one. You mentioned Brother Oswald.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned Brother
Brian.
Brian, yes. Some of you would remember Brother Brian. Brother Edward, some of you would have met him when you were in England. So are there any of the other brothers from that period, kind of the famous old brothers you also remember? Some stories about them, or some stories about Brian or some of the brothers.
Yeah. And then, what do you call them, of course? Yeah. Lots of them, most of them are, but some of the brothers, there's, let me think, what's a good story? For Edward. Edward was a very good man. His father had been the leader of the opposition in Parliament, but his mother used to call him her child, who was a sort of no use, always like a trump. But the funny thing with us, he would go home and he would be staying with his parents, and then he would go out for a drive, you see, and then he would, because we always wore habits in those days, and you would see a Rolls Royce go flashing down the motorway with a friar driving it. with Brother Edward. But he was a very good one. He was a soldier during the war, and if you know anything about some of the horrible things that happened in the Second World War, and I think it affected him in a big way. Edward was one of the people who opened up the prison camps when they went into Poland, the German prison camps where people were put in gas chambers, you know. And he used to tell, he told us stories. He said that they would say to the children, "Oh, come along, we're coming to a party," and they'd all go into this big room, shut the doors, turn gas on. So it's a really horrible time. And he had lived through this and opened many of these up, and I think that probably was the reason he became a Franciscan, because he realized that his ministry was to care for people, to support people, and to, wherever possible, give them a full life, not just a life that's wasted and lost. And I think that's I've seen that as one of the important things, is that you support people, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's in the prison. Because when I was living here in Honiara, every Saturday I went to the prison and we went around and speak to everyone. Then Sunday evening go around and well, once a fortnight show a movie. Those who take service, and the same thing goes for the hospital. And sometimes it's amazing with some of these things what God does for you. I don't know if any of you, did anybody know Norman Palmer? Archbishop? You heard of him, yeah. Well, one time Norman Palmer and I were taking communion around the hospital number 9. And the nurse said, "Oh, there's a man round the corner in the little room." Because what we used to do was go on Thursday and visit everyone and put cards on the beds if people want to make communion. You see, then we start and went for communion. And the nurse said, "Oh, he wants communion in there." Then we went round the corner, and this man had kind of leprosy, and all around here. And the smell was terrible, and it looked terrible. And Norman Palmer, the Archbishop, is a very nice man, but he was the same as me, bad stomach. You smell something, you want to vomit. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and we walked in and said the prayers and somehow put the wafer. We didn't put the chalice because we dipped it in the wine, and put it into his mouth and prayed for him, blessed for him. And the smell, I didn't notice it. We didn't feel sick. It was as if something had gone in with us. And that man was, made his communion with something unexpected. And that's the sort of thing that makes me say, I want to be a friar. I want to be a brother all my life, because you're really meeting people when they're in the most need of help. And even if it's the little thing like giving them communion, shaking their hand, holding their hand, it's something that's worthwhile doing. Does anyone want to ask any questions up to this point?
So when you joined, we had Verna Friary.
Yes.
And what were the friaries we had? What were some of the ministries happening at that time?
Right. There's Verna Friary up in the north. That one was mainly mission work and people visiting and coming to have retreats. And but the brothers also went around a lot to do missions in the parishes. Then if you move down a little bit, we have Glasshampton, which was the training. And so the brothers went to train and become brothers, and it was quite a wonderful place as well, Glashampton, because it was on the top of a hill. You kept silences and things like that. With lots of people coming in, and there was always something there. But also, it was a time when you had quiet, you prayed more, and you, I think, grew in knowing the scriptures and things like that. You see, so it was what was known as the retreat house, and so every novice had a part time there, and that was a time when they spent more time in prayer, more time in reading by themselves. The only time that we didn't do that, because we had to do some work as well, and Father Hugh said to me and someone, "Oh, you fix up the library because the bookshelves are all broken." And so we took all the books out and took the bookshelves down. And he came in, looked, and saw this big mess and said, "Oh yes," and walked away, never came back till it was finished, because he was frightened we'd mix everything up. But it was a place of silence too, when you learn to pray and to be walking with God. Then there was Hillfield, which was the biggest friary, and that's where most of the novices were. I mean, yeah, it's about this. When I was a novice, there was 33 novices there, so it was a big time. And we did work in the forests and in the grounds, and going out on missions. There was a house at Cambridge, which was more of a ministry in the cathedral, but also some brothers would go there for study, education. And then of course there was the oldest house in the community one in London, and in the east end of London, and that had been started by a community before SSF, and then they had finished and we had taken over that house. So they were the houses. And
it's about mission prisons. Yeah.
Yes, oh yes, prisons. Sometimes that was hard work because you go into prison. Well, I tell you the first one. It was, I don't know if anybody's heard of any names of some prisons in England, but there's a very big prison in London called Wormwood Scrubs. It's a very famous one, and it's divided into 4 places. There's a women's prison, there's another prison, and then there's a prison for long-term people. And there was a very big crime in England a few years before this, called the train robbers, where they kill the people on the train and store all of the bags with the money in on the train, and some of them being caught. And they were in this prison, you see. And we went to the prison, and then they separated us, you see, 1 in each. So you went into one block, and that's the one you would stay in, talk to everybody, then move around when they moved around to, because they had laundries and place where they did book work, you know, mending books and things, and so there, you know, lots of activities. So the first day I went in, so they separated us. So Brother Kenneth went here, and Father Nivian went this way, and another brother there, and I went into this D block, they called it. So I opened the block, went in the door, and it was just in time for evening meal. And then I realized everyone was looking at me. And they said, "Give me a plate," and I went and got my food. And then there's absolute silence, you see, and I thought, oh, something is going to happen here. So I walked down the thing, and they said, "Oh, there's a place for you there." And they sent me there to sit down. And I just got sat down, and then somebody turned to me and said something in a very thing like a thing that he was type. And say, "Hey, what's that?" I just look. I had a bun in my mouth. I just looked at him. And I laughed and laughed and spread crumbs all over everybody on the table. But That was the finish of them tricking me. After that, everyone wanted to talk and say hello, and yeah. And I think it's I found that the prison work there, and then other prisons I went to, and prisons here in Papua New Guinea. The thing is, you don't go in there as if you're some fella, a high man going to solve their problems or going to lecture to them, but you're going in as a friend to shake hands and say, oh, how are you keeping like doing, you know, and be a friend with them, and that works every time. Yeah. It's one of the interesting things on that first one was there was one place where there's two men. One was a very rich man, and he'd been money laundering, and he became a good friend. And another one who was working there. Then that second one, when he came out, he went to the Friary in the East End of London and offered his services, and he stayed there until he died. And he was the cook. I've forgotten his name. Sorry, I forgot his name. But anyway, he was the cook there for about 20 years. You know, so it's again, it's always the same. How it's. I think our ministry is not who we meet or what we do. It's just the way we approach people with openness and understanding. And not to, and also not to be too high. To be on their level. Doesn't matter what that level is. When we first came here, I used to always think it was very funny with Rove, because in Rove they used to have about 20 or 30 people coming out, prisoners, with big bush knives to cut the grass on the tree, on the street side, or work in government house thing, and then they had one warder with a little wooden stick. So if there was any trouble, there would be about 30 big bush knives against one little wooden stick. And I used to think, oh, this is very funny. But sometimes I think I was very naughty there, because there was one man in the prison who was really very bad influence on some of the Anglicans, because he said he had custom magic and he was, you know, doing something for them. And then I found out that he had this black stone which he said had power, and he convinced them all that this black stone had power, you see. And one of the people told me about this stone, you see. So I said, oh, I'm going to go look at him. Can you go with me for that? So I went to him and said, oh, I'm good, you need story no more, yeah? So he was talking and talking. Let me say, hey, I think you got him something, yeah? No, me no got him any something, yeah? And he said, hey, you think to me something and stuff with the new, yeah? Hey, something hard. No, I mean, no. In black, yeah? No. Him shiny, him bright, yeah? You got him something, yeah? My name go, give it to me. Because he was controlling all of the prisoners. So he gave me this one, so I said, all right, let me go, put him in a safe place here. You go bury him, you'll see. So I then felt bad afterwards, though I tricked this man, but I think sometimes it's good to, you know, because he was influencing them in a bad way. Plus the fact he was getting their tobacco and stuff from them, and yeah. But it was a real fun, because as you build up the story, he's getting more and more frightened. And there was the thing was also at the prison that time, the Roman Catholics used to all come to the movies as well. Yeah? So it was the whole prison. And the guards and everyone were very helpful. One time there was trouble, I don't know if you heard about, but the group of the prisoners went to cut the grass at Government House. Remember Government House used to be across the other side of the road from the, close up to the Mandana.
Heritage Park
Yeah.
Hotel now, eh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was Government House, you see. And so they went there with their bush knives. Then the Governor General went out, and as one of them was cleaning in the house. So he opened the windows, and they went in and drank all the went to the cabinet and drank all the whiskey and things. So when the Governor General came back, all his alcohol finished. Then they all sent back to the prison. Yes. But it's work I enjoy in the prison, both there and in England too, because there was, if you just go there and you're not judgmental, if you go there and not a man who's going to put something right or be good or something like that, but you're just going to be a friend, and I think it works. And if someone's a friend when they come out, then they've got a friend to go to and see.